we hadn't completed that discussion before we moved to the organizational meeting recess. And so we'll try to pick it up where we left it. We had we had taken public comment, but we had two council members in the queue, Mr. Wilson and Mr. Kennedy. So the rest of you are not precluded from joining the queue, but I wanted to give them first shot since they didn't have their opportunity. Mr. Wilson.
Thank you. Switching gears. Chief, thanks for the budget report. So I appreciate your incorporation of some of the ongoing issues addressing the homelessness as part of your plan.
Yes, sir.
I do share your concerns about the number of retirements. And first of all, congratulations on filling so many of your spots.
Yes.
I mean, it's great news considering where we were a while ago. Can you talk a little bit about recruiting effort? I know at one point I recall the police department having a tough time getting qualified candidates, and I think part of that may have been media at large and maybe some people's view of the attractiveness of the occupation. Now that we're trying to fill 20 spots and keep the staff up to full capacity, can you give us a sense of the recruiting market and your confidence level that we're going to find qualified replacements? Because we don't really hire laterals, we're going to mostly feed at the bottom. Is that how that works? Can you talk about recruiting?
Yes. So over the last few years, it's been difficult to recruit. Media articles, trying to get, for every one we hire, we go through 100, almost 150 candidates. And so it becomes very difficult to go through that process. It's the speed in which we were doing it. We didn't leave it continually open for candidates to apply for the position. I think that I'll call it a stock, for lack of a better word, that our stock wasn't as high as it should have been for a police department like this. And so over the last couple of years, I think the organization, the council, the HR's, human resources has been fantastic. Everybody's effort has helped to increase and improve that stock by how people look at its police department. We were sending people out to individual recruitment fairs in other states and other places over the years, and that didn't produce not a single recruit. But it was cool to go to another state and to try to go to a college and try to recruit. It was a good thing to do. It was a good effort. It just did not get us anything. And we started to focus here locally inside of Pasadena. And when you do that, you'll hit on cities just around us. And so with that, over the years, in the last couple of years, there's been a better feel about Pasadena. If you look at the media articles about Pasadena, in the last year and a half, it's been very positive. There are difficult articles that come out that we have to answer for and we're accountable for. But for the most part, I think we are showing how good the police department is and how much we want to do better. And I think that's representing the people that we're going through. We are getting anywhere from 200 to 400 people per recruitment event that we hold. And we are holding them more often. That's a plus. And I think we have to really continue to look at having local job fairs. We were talking with Kings Village and Community Arms about doing something more local here. So where are we at? Over the last year, 29 new police officers. And that is really a jump up. Like I said, Human Resources said that we have the lowest number of, or the best vacancy rate that we've had probably in a decade, it looks like, and probably longer than that. That's all pluses. It's not just a police department effort. It is really everybody's effort to try to support and market their police department to be a place where they want to go. In the years past, I've had parents come up and say, hey, I'm sending my son over or my daughter over to Glendale or another city, and they'd be very specific to me why. I'm not getting that. I'm getting people say, how do I get into your police department? How do I do this? So I think we're going to get to most of these 20. I'll put reputation on that and how well we're doing. I have people from my sergeant who works over there in Roger Rodan to the lieutenant who's doing it and other people that are recruiting for us. I believe we're going to get there. I believe that the 20 retirements with the people that will leave with injuries, I think we're going to get pretty close to getting all those people into the academies. Now, just because we hire, there's a misnomer that we've hired, right? So today, if I wanted to hire 5 new officers, I wouldn't see those officers right now for a year and a half. And so I have to be smart about how we approach this and how we improve the organization. So the retention factor is separate from the recruitment. Recruitment is something that we do to bring new candidates on. Retention is what you do to keep the people here inside this organization that want to come to work and work in Pasadena. I'm very proud with the fact that nobody has applications to go anywhere right now. We haven't seen that in a few years. However, we have a responsibility to keep our people here, because what that gets us is better decision making, better type of policing, better relationships, people who know people in this community. It goes a long way from a basic field investigation that could take, an hour to one that could take 10 minutes in the same scenario. So I think we're getting there. I think more work has to be done, but collective effort.
Is that 20, that's across the whole department, not just sworn, the 20 people retiring?
That's only the inclusion of the sworn.
That's
20
only
retirement,
sworn?
yes.
Wow.
We'll look at less than a handful of civilians. One just retired last week. We had a K-9 officer who was going to retire this past month, but he's going to stay with us until December. So I see some of that where we have senior people that like what's going on and like what we're doing in the organization. So I'm hoping they decide to stay a little bit longer. So I'm hoping that in fact, works out pretty well. Thank you.
But even as you're recruiting, you are going to lose a lot of institutional knowledge. Obviously, these are senior folks who've been around the block for a while.
And that is not just about rank and management and supervision. I could give you some names, like a Roberto Calcanis, who's been with us for 30 years and grew up in this neighborhood, that is going to be retiring at the end of the year. I can't tell you the amount of times I've driven down the street and seen him in his police car parked, hitting balls in uniform to kids playing out in the park over at Hamilton. So you can't replace that type of style of policing besides what he knows about the hard part about policing. So somehow, some way, we have to really train our new people quicker and faster to understand Pasadena. We've talked about community walks. We've talked about bringing back people who have retired back to the organization, who can in fact help our people understand the culture of Pasadena, the history of Pasadena, and really learn policing at a faster pace. So it's going to be quite the challenge.
Chief, can you talk about the motors group? I mean, they play an important role mostly in dealing with problem areas in a city where there's speed. What is the staffing in that area? Are there any intended changes? What's happened, a little bit like to Victor's question about SES, but what's happened to that part of the organization, and what are your plans?
It's been reduced by 30–40% over the years since the recession. So those officers have moved on to other specialized assignments where we've needed them or in patrol. So I'd like to increase that number back up again by by 2 or 3 more over the years. But again, as we have so many people in patrol, we have a large number on training. Until those officers get off of training and go solo, as we call it, and learn a little bit about police work, I can't move other people out of patrol back into motor. So that's one of the things that's holding us up, is just getting people off training and into the police cars on their own, which takes at least 6 months after the 6-month academy. So it takes a little bit of time.
And the last question I had is, I noticed in your presentation there was a reference to license plate reader.
Yes.
Can you talk about, is that in the patrol cars, or is that anything to do with parking, or what is the purpose of that, and how do you use that?
We need to replace one on one of our trailers that we have to have a new ALPR, and we also want to put them in more of the police cars to include the volunteers, so they understand when they have a stolen vehicle or something pops up, they know what they're looking for and to stay alert about it. They are in a white vehicle when they're volunteers, but they need to be aware of what they come across out there. So having more of ALPRs are great. They're great for investigative events. I recall one not too long ago where we had somebody on a violent sexual event, and by inputting that license plate early, we can start tracking them around the county where they're at. So when we have enough information to make that arrest, we could track them down. So it's real important from an investigative end that we have that for public safety, and that when you've been a victim of a horrific crime, you know your police department is doing the right thing to find the person that caused it.
Did the parking enforcement, those little carts, have license plate readers on them as well, or not?
They do have license plate readers. I don't know how many. We'd have to turn to DOT for that, but they do have those, and at times we've provided training for them and how to use that information and to be aware of.
Does that data flow back to you? Because, I mean, obviously they're pretty good at giving parking tickets.
We have access to it if we need it.
But you don't get that on a real-time basis, so if someone's driving up, Marengo giving parking tickets, you couldn't tell whether that was a stolen vehicle.
We have our own, so we could read those ourselves as the officers are driving around.
But if once again, my only thought is parking enforcement probably is spending more time reading license plates than you guys. Is there any way to repurpose it, I don't know if it's legal or not, that data to look for targeted license plates or criminal activities I mean, once again, there's a little bit of cross-utilization of departments in the city. If the parking folks are doing that, then they can help you do your jobs better.
Absolutely, they have the ability to let us know when they have a stolen vehicle or something like that is popping up. But for the most part, we don't really track the parking tickets, and they don't really focus on trying to find stolen vehicles. But if they come across it, they'll let us know right
So they get
away.
alerted, so when they run,
They'll be alerted on the screen, I'll tell them what it is, so.
and they'll let you know.
Right.
Okay, okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Mr. Kennedy?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Chief Perez, sometimes in a org chart, you'll see a greater detail in an org chart that would drill down in boxes and have, if not the person's name, certainly the position. First of all, I'd like to say up to this point, thank you for the presentation. So what I personally think would be helpful is across the horizontal, where it has administration, criminal investigations, field, et cetera. Is it to be read that all of those four are commanders in the police department?
Yes, one is run by the deputy chief, so the deputy chief's office technically would run the administrative section, but the other three are run by the divisional commanders. So when you have criminal investigations, we're talking about newly promoted Commander Clausen. When you look at field operations, we have Commander Moody, and in strategic services, we have Commander Calatayud. The administrative section is run by the chief's office under the deputy chief.
And then below, if you don't even use the names of the individuals, as an example, for the deputy chief reporting to the chief, for wherever that deputy chief has line authority, they could be placed in one of the boxes. But what I was getting at is below commander, listing out what those positions and responsibilities are, and maybe a more detailed org chart. It would be helpful for me. I don't know if you have such already in the department, but it's something I'd like to at least consider. It's not mandatory, obviously, and I'm not suggesting that you have to do it, but it'll clarify in a graphical way what the police department looks like. Then I'm wondering why, or if we are engaged in continuous recruitment for the vacancies at the police officer rank in the police department. Are we gonna?
Continually, yes,
We are.
it's continual.
It is, okay. So that will address in part the natural attrition, I suspect, that you see happening in the police department? Is that accurate?
You say it again, I'm sorry.
The natural attrition that you'll see in the police department from retirements, whatever that natural attrition is?
Yeah, the movement over this year will be dynamic. It'll be one of the fastest moving years I've seen in a number of years, because as people promote, they have to promote to another assignment. It's a constant movement of people inside the organization. So one of the things we try to sit back with staff is try to predict a promotion and try to step it out 3-4 places to see who's going to move as a result of one promotion. There's other promotions that come up. So Commander Clausen could cause 3 other promotions. Besides that, you could have 3 or 4 people moving laterally into different assignments. So before you make a promotion, you closely have to evaluate how much impact it has to the organization. One of the things I do is try to hold on promotions because that helps to avoid vacancies in certain assignments like patrol. And so I try to be patient to how quick we promote as well. And so it is going to be continual. It takes some thought to make sure the right people are in the right assignments and the constant movement of what that requires with the promotions.
So the point in bringing that up is just to make sure that you have the latitude, which the council and the manager gave you some time ago, to make sure you have those folks in the pipeline, so when that natural attrition happens, you have people who are ready to step up and be placed into those positions, which is your strategic leadership in the police department. Also, it doesn't seem to be in your presentation efforts associating what was historically called civilianization.
Yes.
And for those who are not familiar with the term, it's the practice of assigning police department work that does not require police officers special training or skill to civilian employees. Low law enforcement experience often is not necessary for providing the effective police support. And just as a background point, the more civilianization that takes place, the less of an impact it has on the overall budget. And I would like to know if there is consideration still, I'd like to know your opinions about civilianization.
So we moved two positions. One is our crime analysis expert, who it once belonged to a sworn corporal, now belongs to a civilian. We're also looking at hiring a computer forensic specialist who's also going to be a civilian. So that's that part of it. However, last year we created an ad hoc committee of several committees, one of which was a civilian ad hoc committee that had 3 months to give us recommendations. And so moving forward, as we restructure the organization, that is going to be a large part of looking at where we could assign civilians and where we may need them. Now with that, we saw that there was a gap in their expertise in professional development that's fallen off over the last few years. So we have brought in trainers to provide training for our civilian ranks. They are now going to more of the sworn police officers training inside the police department. We've had a conversation with the Peace Officer Standards of Training up in Sacramento, and they've agreed with us that dispatchers should be able to go to that supervisor's leadership course, much like a police sergeant. So Pasadena has a little bit of influence on what's happened. They came down to our office to have that conversation. So I think as we take the ad hoc recommendations, council member, we'll be able to craft this with the major changeover in the organization. It'll be quite too early now to do it, but we definitely have to provide the professional development to get our employees ready for what they haven't had in a while, and that is development and professional training so they're ready for any assignments that come up. So we'll see how that looks going forward.
So I'm glad to hear your response, because a small number of departments have actually seen what they term reverse civilianization.
Right.
And so I'm hopeful that our department isn't moving back in that direction, because there's significant savings so long as the civilians have the expertise that you need and our community needs as the chief. As it relates to temporary or modified duty positions, what percentage of our workforce is in that classification? I'm just curious.
So on any given week or any given month, we look at anywhere from about 7 to 12 people that are off on injury, that will not be able to return to work. And we usually have about 4 to 5 that constantly run in what we call modified assignments. Every 90 days I have to give an approval for those, and sometimes I provide an extension for people on modified duty. Those that are off on injury have 365 days to recover. We've worked well with human resources over the years to improve our internal systems with our internal labor associations, because many times if the employee has to wait 7 to 8 months for a surgery, the recovery time may take them past the 1 year period, and they have to be reduced to state time for their paychecks. And have gone through that a couple times myself with knee reconstruction. It's very frustrating that we try to push the surgery up front early, giving you more time for recovery, better chance for us to get the employee back. And I'd have to also add in the human resources. We've been working with them, and it finally went through last year to have an internal physical therapist that we keep down at the bottom of the city hall, so employees are able to come here for the therapy. What I've learned over the years is employees want to be at work, they'll cancel their therapy sessions, and it gets extended how long they're on modified duty. By having it here in the station, in the basement, we're able to send people here during their work hours, and they're able to go back to their desks, take a shower after the therapy, and then go back to work. So that's been helpful in trying to reduce that effort. So modified duty, long-term injuries are always going to happen every day, and it's just a matter of how we're staying on top of it. We have monthly meetings to track each one to see what their injuries and how they're recovering, and I try to call everyone every month to make sure I understand what's happening from the workers' comp process. And lastly, the Police Officers Association and the others will keep me aware if there is struggles or problems with the process, and I either reach out to the city manager or talk to workers' comp or human resources.
And then as it relates to following up Councilmember Wilson's comments about license plate readers, don't the license plate readers, even if it is somewhat of an intrusion on someone's belief that they have some kind of First Amendment grounds, it actually helps our police officers be safer, so they'll know possibly some information about the person that they may stop. It's not a definitive, but it's a quick gathering of information that can be very helpful in policing, isn't it?
Absolutely, it's used 100% for criminal investigations, and that's it. Nothing more, nothing less.
Then, as it relates to Councilmember Gordo's comments about Washington Park, I think it was 2 years ago we had night out there, and a number of residents had already brought to our attention issues, and a good contingent of the Pasadena Police Department were there to hear directly from the residents in the area. And that park, albeit it's in Councilmember Gordo's district, but my district butts the park. So I'm receiving, Councilmember Gordo, the same kind of questions, concerns that you're receiving, and as strong as you are receiving, for neighbors writing me, telling me that they don't feel safe in the park, that open drug sales, some suggesting by email, and I can share them, that they don't feel like they can visit the park anymore. And I think that's a shame, because the park is a place that it's supposed to be welcoming, certainly the tennis courts, the basketball courts, and just to picnic for families. And so when we had that national night out, I thought we had focused the necessary attention for protracted involvement by the police department. And if I recall, Mr. Gordo, we actually approved additional one, at least, activity that had been lost through the budget.
Person.
There's a .5
Yeah, there's
position currently budgeted at the park,
Right.
and of course, the budget in the Human Services and Recreation Department, which we'll review at a subsequent meeting, includes a recommendation to add a 1.0 staffer.
Well, let me say this.
But
But that was a programs person.
right. But when Mr. Kennedy's referring to is, we originally we had 0 program staff there, and at some point we went with a 50% person, and I believe that's what Mr. Kennedy's referring to.
.5 which is consistent with most of our parks.
So I don't want to mince words about this. There's no way that we can continue to do business at Washington Park like we're doing it. Councilmember Gordo's leadership on this is critically important. All of us need to get behind his comments related to additional resources in that particular park. All of us want to make sure that our parks that are in our district are safe. And Mr. Gordo rightly is bringing to our attention that the neighbors do not feel safe. And so we have the capacity, however we do it, to make sure that children and families and seniors feel safe in going into that park. So I'm standing firmly with Mr. Gordo as it relates to that park, Chief. And I hope that you will immediately start to address the issues there. And you don't need to report necessarily back to me. The residents are keeping me up in the context of those emails that I do read each one of them. And so I'm hoping that we will really listen first, do what the police do best, and then get the kind of park safety specialists who are not sworn, who do their work day in and day out with the plum. And we, as a council, need to be supportive, and I know that we are. So in summary, Chief Perez, as hard as we can push the civilianization program, I think it's wise. Obviously, in the past, we've had some pushback. Even before we had Chief Jerry Oliver here in the city, there was Chief Roberson,
It was Chief Philpott.
Philpott Roberson,
Roberson,
who
yes,
had
correct.
moved Mary Saunders through the ranks to be kind of like a beacon for the police department to say that this is our commitment to civilianization. For other employees who are not sworn in the organization, there is a pathway for you to move up. From the budgetary standpoint, for all of us who are on the budget and audit or finance, our objective is to make sure that the police department is right-sized, and I don't think it can be right-sized unless there's a strong commitment by you to civilianization, because there's significant cost savings if we really get the people who can do the job, who are not sworn internally in those positions that are not required to be filled by a sworn officer.
That's correct. And when it comes to the parks, what I'd like to see is the public safety really to make sure I'm doing my job the way it's supposed to be done. I need to be asked about what we're doing in the summer. The parks are a very serious issue that part of our job is to check how well they're being used. And if they're not, then I'm responsible for that. If we're not getting people to walk through the parks, police officers, civilian personnel, then we're not doing it well. The more people that can use our parks, the safer it's going to be, the better we're going to have when it comes to quality of life issues. Whoever might be selling drugs, homeless people, they will leave those parks. It's not comfortable for them. So we don't have enough park usage at any of the 32 parks as I drive around. Once in a while on the weekend, I'll see one with a couple of parties going on, and and that's pretty good. So more needs to be done, holding us accountable to that is where we should be. And for the civilian part of the department, I think you'll see a changeover as we develop their training and do things over time. It's been a while since we've had a civilian overseeing civilians in a division, and those kind of things have to be reevaluated as we go forward.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Gordo, I also got a call this morning related to Villa Park. Are you satisfied with the, I sent it to Vanya, the call and email. Are you satisfied that you have the support you need at Villa Park?
Well, I think, Villa, we're always concerned about, and I appreciate you bringing it up, the safety at all of the parks. But Villa has the benefit of having more programming than does Washington. And so I think you're correct to recall that it was a half person, or a half FTE, I should say, that we approved before the city manager is now coming forward with a full FTE. Is it, Steve, just so that I'm correct, is it net new full-timers plus the half-timer that we'll have there now?
It's, the recommendation is for a net addition of one.
Okay,
So in addition to the existing half.
and that'll be helpful because, particularly because during the summer, a lot of the programming is in the evening. But we are in contact with the neighbors around Villa Park. My office and I've had contact with the police chief regarding particularly what happens on the weekends in the evening around the park. And the city manager's got some recommendations on improvements, capital improvements, that I think will go a long ways to addressing some of those concerns. But it's something that we have to stay on top of, both as from the policing end and the investment in community end from the city manager, and then here at the council. So I appreciate you raising those.
Finally, I would simply like to say to my colleagues, when Victor and I were little kids, I don't think either of us were afraid to go into the parks. And something is happening, and it must be happening by virtue of the number of emails that I've received of late. So I do agree, Mr. Gordo, that all of our parks must be safe, all of them. And that's a policy directive, a simple policy directive from the council to the city manager, and holding the city manager accountable to make that happen. And I think we've got to do it from the emails that I've received of late. It's not negotiable. If we have to cut those 22 or whatever that number of positions that are coming up through the city manager's budget requests, I'm saying we've got to do it. That's what makes our city unique, people feeling safe, and certain people are not feeling safe. And I think they're not exaggerating. They're not exaggerating. So I hope the council, through this budget process, will really listen. Unfortunately, I'm not as fortunate as most of you who have lots of parks in your districts, but I'm certainly supportive of what you're saying to me, and that is that we need more attention to make all of our parks safe. And it's not just me on a soapbox, it's real.
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. Mr. Madison?
Thank you, Mayor. Chief, I think you know my constituents care as much as any of us about public safety, and I'd like to think that we're supportive of the department and your efforts. And I think your budget does have the right priorities. I think, for me, when I think about the public safety vis-a-vis the police department, the homeless piece is an existential threat to our city, and a major compassion issue too. So I applaud your efforts to work across disciplines in the city and really make that a high priority. I think gangs and crimes of violence, particularly with firearms, have to be a very, very high priority for us. Obviously, we have these special events, including, sometimes they come in bunches, like this weekend, where we had 3 major events at the Rose Bowl. And, for my district in particular, our concern, and we're fortunate in this sense, is, property crimes and burglaries and the like. So I think you've got a lot of top priorities. But let me kind of take it back to just at its most simple level. How many sworn officers do we have right now?
We have FTEs is budgeted for 234 with 5 defunded.
I didn't hear the last part.
234 is what we work off of. Plus there's additional 5 defunded.
Okay.
Chief, I actually think it's 239.
Right, -5.
Of which 5 are defunded, so
That
for
works
a
as
net
well.
234. And then the council has previously approved 10 additional positions if we need to overhire to accommodate filling of vacancies, people in the academy, that sort of thing.
There you go.
So
So
effectively,
I hired to
234 is
234
the operable number.
Okay.
with the ability to go 10 over that.
Yeah,
How's
that may be more complicated than it needs to be.
Probably.
I guess what I'm hearing is, right now, we're authorized 234.
Well, 239,
You have budget for 234 officers.
there you go.
Right.
But budget for 234.
Okay. So are we, in this budget, Mr. City Manager, are we funding the 5 additional?
No, the recommended budget does not recommend funding the additional, does not recommend refunding those positions.
And then, how many actual on-duty sworn officers do we have? at
We
the
have
moment?
5 vacancies, so you're looking, it's a long answer. And the reason for that is we have 5 vacancies at this time. We have people that are injured, we have people in the academy, we have people that haven't started in the academy yet that are hired, and we have people that are in training status. So we have 5 vacancies is what I go off of. But it's really hard to tell you how many are active every week. It changes week to week. But we have 5 vacancies. However, by July, I'll be at 10. And then after that, I'll start to skyrocket on me as the retirements come and we're trying to hire at the same
Right.
time.
And so, I mean, this couldn't happen for a variety of reasons, but if you, summoned every sworn officer in the department to the field of the Rose Bowl, it sounds like we'd have 229 at the moment, but some of those wouldn't be able to report because they're injured or...
Injured in the academy, haven't yet started the academy. I just hired 4 last week. So all those anomaly little things. So operational, I'm going to go with a number of you minus the 5. You could probably go with 215 or 220. is a operational number. Of those, you're going to have 150 to 160 officer corporals. You're going to have 14 lieutenants, even a couple of them are on injury. And then we're going to have the 3 commanders and 1 deputy chief and your chief. So that's the way it would work. So we had full staffing. We have 160 officers. With the corporals, it goes up closer to 190. And then you have about 34 sergeants, and you have 14 lieutenants, and that runs in that regards. And that's combined with the 123 civilians in different areas. Of those, we have 4 that are administrators that hold the same rank as lieutenant. To Councilmember Kennedy's point, they are civilians in the management ranks, and we have about 10 to 12 supervisors that hold the same ranks as the sergeants. We're about to undertake another retreat with supervisors and sergeants. That brings all of our sworn sergeants with our civilians into one room. So it's kind of how it moves constantly.
So, I mean, I think the most important thing we can do is try to figure out, and I don't think, with all due respect, the policy directives do it. I think we've got to vote with our pocketbook and try to staff the police department as fully as we possibly can. So obviously that discussion has to continue. But in terms of park safety specialists, they are not sworn officers, correct?
Correct.
And how many do we have?
We have 5 plus a 6th one will be hired in a couple of weeks. That is well, first of all, we have no park safety specialists. They're all security rangers. We refer to them in the police department as park safety specialists, but they are all classified from the city as security rangers. So we have 5 security rangers that work our parks.
Okay.
That's
And
a better
we
way
have-
to look at it.
We have a 6th coming on duty.
We have a 6th coming on who's a community service officer that we will configure into that assignment to work the parks. And we have 2 additional community service officers in which we're looking at how we could design them into that same assignment. Obviously, you have to be concerned with the human resources end of classifications for employees. Over time, sometimes you have people filing complaints or concerns about working the same assignments, yet somebody's getting a higher pay than the other. So historically, our community service officers, our park safety specialists, the security rangers, and our jail detention personnel run the same type of gamut in their responsibilities.
I want to just stay with the parks right now. So I'm not sure if you're telling us that you're using community service officers sort of as a stopgap temporarily, or if they're also doing the same jobs as park safety specialists?
Not yet, but we have 5 security rangers operating as park safety specialists.
Gotcha.
And we have a 6th one starting that is classified as a community service officer who will be working in the same type of responsibility as a park safety specialist.
Okay.
So Councilmember Madison and the chief mentioned this earlier in the day. We are working to convert one of the CSOs to a park safety specialist. There's 2 other vacant CSOs. The chief is currently assessing whether those ought to also be repurposed and become park safety specialists. I don't want to prejudge the outcome of that, but my sense is he's leaning in that direction.
And there, I overheard some conversation just here about deployment, for example, with Villa Park or Washington Park. Are there specific assignments for these, any of these individuals that come from you or from you? Or?
I'll let the chief explain. We have more parks than we have people to patrol them, so the park safety specialists tend to move around, but I'll let the chief elaborate.
What's the specific question you're asking?
Well, I thought I heard we have 1 or a half a person for Villa Park. And
Different classification. Those are recreation leaders that we were just
Okay, I
discussing. And when we
apologize.
I'm
review
confused. I'm not sure what the question
human
might be.
services budget, we'll talk about those positions.
So my question was, you as chief have complete authority over the deployment of the park safety specialists, right?
Correct.
And that should not change, in my view. How many motors do we have currently?
We currently have 8 motors, 1 sergeant, 1 lieutenant, total of 10. But I said 2 are at ranking positions. One's at a lieutenant rank, one's at a sergeant rank, and you have 8 police officers.
So at our high water mark, how many motors did we have?
I'd have to check back. The recession changed everything, so I couldn't tell you. Pre-recession, the world was much different, and we can't even compare it to where we're at today. But just after the recession, I think we were up at about 10 or 12. 12 might have been high, but at least 10.
Do you have a recollection, Steve?
I don't. We should be able to get that
Is
information.
that prior to the recession, for that period of time, or post?
I'm just looking for the high water mark ever.
Yeah, I don't know what the high water mark is anymore, because like I said, the recessionary period changed the world over completely, and it's almost like comparing apples to oranges. In my 34 years with the department, I've never seen anything as dynamic as the recession to what happened to cities and the economy. So,
I get that, but traffic fatalities are, right up there globally as one of the leading causes of death, and
Absolutely.
so it's.
I think we have one this year, which is one of the lowest years that we've had, so we're fortunate for that as well.
Right, but I
That's
would
a
like
very
to
big
see
part.
us have more motor officers, figure out a way. So does this budget contemplate additional resources for motor officers?
This budget the recommended budget does not request any additional appropriations for officers.
Okay.
How the chief indicated that he's going through a reorganization within the department, and how the department may be realigned between field services, traffic, and the other divisions of the department will be left to how he approaches that with his staff. So he may decide that in one particular division they need to reallocate, and there was discussion earlier today in the reallocation of positions out of criminal investigations into field services, for example. So I would leave it to the chief to expand on that.
Yeah, and so our needs define our challenges. So there's been years where this time of the year we've had 5 or 6 fatalities. Like I said, we have 1 so far, which is tragically in itself. I'd like to put 10 officers on that 1 to make sure it's investigative right. However, resources are not like that. So having 1 fatality this year, 8 traffic officers with experts to come out is appropriate. However, that doesn't get to the issue of traffic issues around the city and where we need to deploy them, and does have to be evaluated. So all these, the whole department has to be relooked at for which challenges come first, because as we look at each challenge, any place from a private company, anywhere else, you could add 5 officers to every issue, and at the end of it, 5 years from now, we could still be looking at the same issues. In my 34 years here, we've added officers and did make an impact on the gang violence at times. Other times we had, so there's no real dynamic. I know what does work, and that is having trained police officers that are the best at what they do, and keeping a retention of officers is the singular most important thing I could do for this department, this community, to ensure nobody leaves and they want to be here, and we use that experience. Sometimes you see one singular officer work as good as 2 or 3, and when that person leaves to another department, it does hurt our services. So it is a difficult thing to answer, but I just want to ensure you that we're doing the best that we can. But again, putting a lot of people to one problem is not always the answer.
Well, and I would add that when we review the transportation department's budget, some of the things that we've done there with speed feedback signs and road designs are one way we're also addressing traffic issues in terms of increasing safety.
Yeah, I mean, I get that we have to work smarter, but I also think we need to, and I know there is an increase for this department in the budget, as I understand, but I'm not sure it shows up in terms of the boots on the ground.
Well, the increase is really, in dollars, it's significant given the size of this budget at $88 million. So I think it was about a 4.1% increase
Correct.
for this department. So
That's correct.
just the cost of maintaining our services every year from a budget perspective increases.
I get that, but we went to the voters with a sales tax, and public safety was a big part of the pitch. So
The pitch was to maintain essential services, and that's what this budget does. It maintains our essential services. If you recall from last week's presentation, but for Measure I would have had to present about $3.5 million in proposed reductions, which would be gut-wrenching for us because, again, given the large proportion of the budget that the police department and fire departments make up, they would have to contribute to those reductions. Thankfully, that's not before you this evening.
I hear all that, but we do have Measure I, and I think it's incumbent on us to show some real increase in public safety.
We're
resources.
using about $3.5 million of the Measure I money to maintain these services in the police department and other general fund operations.
We'll add
But that's,
this.
if I could, that's less than the percentage of the police department's budget of the general fund vis-a-vis that number that you just cited in Measure I's additional revenues.
That's correct.
So essentially, the police department's being shorted in terms of these new dollars.
I'd say we're maintaining the services.
Right, but I don't think if you did a survey of the voters, they would have thought it was just maintained. They would have thought additional dollars mean additional resources. And then if they were told, did you know that we were actually going to use a smaller percentage of those new dollars on public safety than we are the current dollars, I think that would move the needle in terms
Well, we
of
told,
people's
we,
reaction.
in none of the
I
presentations
don't want
of
to.
the
I don't want
staff
to
meeting-
debate the. I don't want to debate
Right.
the election. My point is, I believe that we should be dedicating at least the same percentage of the new dollars to this department as we are the general fund.
And the council is totally free to reallocate dollars as it see fits.
And with that, I need to
Well,
add,
it's not a reallocation with that source of revenue. This will be the first time that these dollars have been allocated.
The council is free to program those dollars, if that's a better word. We are recommending about 9.4 million of it towards our capital projects. If the council would prefer to do fewer capital projects, then that is one place. There's only $500,000 worth of general fund dollars that I'm recommending towards enhancements. 320 of that is in the fire department one time. So there's precious little sort of new general fund money being recommended for enhancements in the budget.
But we've got these, I really think transparency should cause us to look at, the idea that we have 239, but we've defunded, 5. And again, I would think most voters would say, we voted for this sales tax initiative in part for public safety purposes, large part. Let's at least fund the current positions that are defunded. And what does that mean anyway?
It means about $830,000 in the
I
current
get
year.
that, yeah. But that's, what is that? 5% of the additional revenue you expect on the sales tax?
If your math is right, I think your math is right.
Pardon? Yeah. So I think the voters would say that would be where they'd like to see this money spent. So, but to be continued. Thank you
yeah,
so much, Chief.
and I think it's important to know that over these years, they probably would, but it's a full narrative. In over 30 years of this department, I have seen us either go for equipment or personnel. And every time we've gone for personnel, we never get to the equipment. We are 33 years behind on CAT RMS. We are 20 years behind on mobile command post. We usually wait for equipment to get to Walmart and we buy it. We got to stop that. We just bought new tasers that won't allow us, that will prevent us from deploying it 14 times on a person and will allow us to use it twice. So my career has told me if we don't push for the equipment now, if we don't push for the infrastructure before we add in more people, I've seen this before, we've added more people and the problems haven't gone away. But I know that we have not improved the equipment. The equipment has not improved, so there's a balance to those both, to those two. That's fantastic. I just haven't seen it. And
I hear you, but I'll just again tell
Thank
you
you so
that
much.
for my district, what we want to see in part is an experienced officer in his or her vehicle in our neighborhoods and in the city. And I think police presence and the strength in numbers of having more officers to back one another up contributes many, many good things. So anyway, I really appreciate the time, Chief. Thank you.
Steve, wouldn't you say all of the districts in the city want that?
Absolutely, I would, yes. And John, I think you stepped out when I was talking about how my district is in many ways fortunate in terms of their own individual situations, because the biggest complaint about public safety that I hear is property crimes and burglaries. And I have to constantly explain at my town hall meetings that we can't have officers, driving up and down the residential streets of West Pasadena when we have shootings and gang activity in other parts of the city. So absolutely, you're right.
Thank you. Ms. McAustin?
Thank you. Thank you, Chief. I know when you were here, when we were beginning of the meeting with the Finance Committee, a lot of this came out earlier, and I think maybe some of us weren't here to hear that. Just three areas really I want to go over. Can you remind me, what's the Public Safety Augmentation Fund?
That's property sales, property tax money that we get every year from the state.
Chief, you have to move back to the mic.
Oh, State of California property tax money.
So
And
it's a separate allocation of tax money that
Yes.
comes on a regular basis?
yes, yearly.
Yearly, okay, you get it every year. So, as has been stated, you stated yourself earlier, and we've talked many times, the biggest problem we're facing right now in the city, and talking to the mayor earlier about his conversations with my constituents, is homelessness. You know, all of our constituents are complaining about it. We're complaining about it to you and you and you. And that combined with the issues in the park. So much of the homeless problem kind of is in the park, comes into the parks, keeps people, is one of the big issues that keeps people from using the parks and from feeling safe in the parks. In terms of Washington Park, that park has unique characteristics because so much of it is below grade, and it's just really is kind of unique in terms of parks. So the homeless issue and the parks and the light rail stations, again, another place where we see people not wanting to use the light rail, people not wanting to use the parks because they're afraid, they're uncomfortable, you know, the noise, the smell, they're going to be accosted, they don't want to step over people, you know, whatever it is. So we see this over and over and over again. And this really is the crux of what we talk about when we want Pasadena to be a great city. People feel comfortable, people feel safe, and that's a very basic issue that's really infiltrated not just the parks and the light rail stations, but the downtowns, and you know, we're seeing it all over the city. So I just wanted to say that I very much appreciate the fact that you are working with your staff, with your police officers, and getting their feedback on what they're seeing as the problems in the community and how they think we should be deploying our resources to address those problems and doing a restructuring of your department. I mean, this is the first time since I've been on the city council that I've heard a police chief say, well, I'm starting by listening to the officers who are listening to the constituents, and this is where they're saying, you know, these are the problems they're seeing in the city, and how can I reorganize my department to be responsive to the community, because that's really the bottom line of what I'm hearing you say. And I think that's very important, and it is a switch, and it means there's a change in how we're addressing policing and how we're addressing responsiveness to our community's needs. You know, I think for many years it was like, well, this is how police, you know, department is organized and this is how we do. But you're kind of turning that on its head, and I really want to salute you for that, because I think that is a way our community and our police department will get even better connected, because they're going to understand that the police department is redesigning itself to address what they have told us and told the police chief are their problems. And again, homelessness and personal safety within the city, which has been pointed out was never, for many, many years, never an issue. But people have to feel safe everywhere in the city, whether it's Old Pasadena, East Pasadena, you know, light rail station or park. And so I think I heard you say you as a police chief are not requesting any additional officers. You feel you have positions that you have yet to fill, and you're hopeful you can fill those. But you think you can address the needs of the city through your restructuring efforts and the budget that's here.
Absolutely.
Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I feel
Long
very,
one.
very confident.
Short question at the end. So just a little bit about the restructuring then. So I know you said, I think you had 3 more one-day retreats to go through, and then you're going to start sort of putting it together. So give me a rough timeline, if you would.
So the first retreat just ended. In fact, I was fortunate to have the city manager talk to the group about the goals and the vision of the city, which is important. And this group of frontline people, sworn and civilian, sat in a room for 10 hours. And they went through our current priorities as well as looking what the restructure of the organization might look like. That was completed. They'll prepare a memo. They will give a briefing to the next level, which will be supervisors and sergeants. The same process will occur, and we'll take that to the leadership team, as we call it. That's our lieutenants and our administrators. And in that meeting, we'll have labor representatives from each association that'll be present to also go through the same process. Those 3 will produce separate memorandums. And at that point, that'll allow the command staff, the deputy chief, the 3 commanders, and the chief to look at this information and come up with something. Timeline is I'm hoping by September or October to go back to the very first group, which was our civilian and sworn frontline personnel, go back to them, present everything to them, and together work on what the first 4 or 5 action steps will be. So before the end of the year is out, an action plan is what we're looking for, beginning in 2020 to start to move everything around as the budget process comes about, and to try to define how many FTEs for our divisions are needed, along with specific work groups that are going to focus on these issues. I'll give you a quick example, not to give you too much of what we're going to be doing, but you look at the quality of life, you look at homeless, you look at what's going on with chronic problems, nuisance abatement, the crash team, all these different things that go on. I believe there's a quality of life team of officers, of bicycle officers with hope, and other people that come together and really focus on these issues, allowing patrol people to focus more on calls for service and neighborhood policing, and then having a violence reduction unit as well as a major crimes unit that could look at other parts of the cities for investigations on career criminals. So it's all heading that way and talking to the first group, but I think before wintertime hits, I think we will have a plan to move forward. Not an easy.
That goes back to the city manager.
I continue to keep him briefed on every move and get his guidance and insight and making sure I'm going after the right thing. So there's not much I'm going to do without the city manager knowing about it, or maybe even public safety to that matter. But it's a long process. It's an internal process. The community is also involved in all the information I've gotten over the last year. But I think we're moving to a place where the people in the department are a heck of a lot smarter than I am. And my job is to design it and put it on paper to make sure it makes sense from both a structure and a financial end, that it's doing the right thing for our community.
Well, I appreciate that very much, because one of the challenges I think we have with police and with addressing some of these problems, homelessness and the nuisances and some of these things is, we don't need to necessarily have a sworn officer with a gun, doing social service work. So I think that's one of the challenges we've faced over the years. So anyway, I look forward to what you're coming forward with, in hopes that we can have a police department that's responsive to the community's needs in a more direct way.
I'm looking forward to it as well.
Okay.
Thank you, Ms. McCaustin. Mr. Gordo?
Thank you. Chief, we had some discussion earlier in the afternoon, so I just want to finish some of my questions. But before we do that, I think one of the things, I appreciate that you're going to be reorganizing the department, and like Councilmember McCaustin, I think it's a great idea to get the input of the line officers. But I'm having a hard time as I hear the discussion and some of the answers. I don't have a snapshot of what the department looks like today. The question on how many motors, for example.
I think I've answered that. I said 8.
I'm sorry?
I said 8 officers.
Oh, okay.
I did. So I'm not sure if I could repeat the
missed
ones.
that then.
If you have any specific questions, I could answer them.
Yeah,
if you have them.
so one, for example, is how do you define, maybe I'm just misunderstanding how you define patrol. How do you define patrol officers in your shop? When I asked you earlier about patrol, I think you said the number was 92, if I remember correctly.
You were talking about Field Operations Division.
Yeah.
Patrol is one section of Field
Okay.
Operations Division.
And so how would you define
Patrol?
Patrol, yeah. Who's assigned to patrol? Is
We
it
have
voter?
7 patrol shifts,
Okay.
and each one has a group of people assigned to it. And they handle the calls for service, and they're assigned to different service areas. And they're the ones that respond to the well over 90% of the calls for service.
But patrol officers, I mean, when I think of patrol, I'm thinking officers, patrolling the city actively, not responding necessarily to radio calls, but trying to find whether it's people violating the law in their vehicles, texting or speeding. What's your definition of patrol? Just so we're using the same
It's not
definition.
my definition, it's the definition.
Well,
A
what's the definition
Yeah, so
of patrol?
I don't know where your version comes from at all, so it's probably good to understand.
I don't
the
know that I
background.
have a version. I'm trying to
Okay, got
understand.
it. So the patrol,
trying
so
to
the patrol,
understand.
yeah.
I'm trying to
The
understand,
patrol-
when I say patrol, what does that mean?
Patrol officers, as I just defined them, they handle calls for service. They spend, in a perfect world, they spend between 70 to 80% of their time responding to calls for service, investigating those calls for service, either writing reports or doing some field investigations on top of that. About 20 to 30% of a police officer's time needs to be discretionary, where they're able to work problems in the neighborhood, where they're able to investigate crimes on their own without getting another call for service. There are some nights we have so many calls for service we can't keep up with them. Other nights, the officers have more time to do traffic stops, to walk the parks, to do all these things, and it's discretionary time. So in other words, they have to make that decision on their own without being directed.
So patrol, from the definition of patrol, is the officers assigned to respond when a constituent calls and says, I believe there's a problem in my neighborhood.
In part, yes.
part, okay.
That's mostly their job.
Okay, so
That's most of their.
so how would I know how many or do we have officers specifically assigned just to traffic enforcement? And is that limited to the 8 in motors, or are there other officers that are assigned to traffic enforcement?
So 2 different questions. The ones in the traffic division obviously just focus on traffic and investigations on fatalities, as the council member mentioned. But as for patrol, if they have discretionary time and they're directed by their supervisor to work traffic problems, they will. But most of the time, that's not the case. There'll be calls for service that they're focused
Set
on.
aside the patrol. I understand that function now, and I understand there's discretionary time that they may have available. But do we have motor officers? The 8. I'm assuming are assigned solely to traffic enforcement. Am I correct about that?
That's correct.
Okay. Do we have other officers beyond those 8 that are assigned solely to traffic enforcement?
Only on specialized operations.
Okay,
So
so-
on Friday night, there might be a DUI checkpoint.
Okay.
And we will use most of the traffic officers, and we'll bring in others who are available to work on overtime
Okay.
on that assignment.
And so the 8 at any given time are the only 8. Again, I understand your point on the discretionary time that patrol officers may have. But the 8 are the ones that are dedicated to ensuring passing in safety on streets.
Absolutely. They're broken out into different parts of the city. You'll see them oftentimes in the morning working problem locations. When we get these complaints, and the lieutenant will look at these and divvy them up between the traffic officers, and they'll go out and work those for a while.
Now remind me, I missed the number 8, so I may have missed another number. How many historically motor officers have we had in the past?
As I explained earlier, that the recession changes every
No,
day.
I
Council member, that's the number we're going to go back and
Okay,
research. We
so
don't have
we'll-
that available tonight.
I think I understand
10
the
or
point.
12 has been what it might be a
remember-
lot higher than that even, so.
I remember more, but
Yeah,
we'll
it might
see.
have been hired before the recession, but again, that is it is a huge dynamic to explain
No.
what the impact
you
is.
don't need to tell us. We lived it.
You guys led us through that, so.
But now, at least for the moment, we're out of that financial situation. And one of the things we said to the voters when we went to the voters is, help us out. And I agree with Mr. Madison that one of the big issues was public safety. And it's maintaining, but I also believe we told the voters we were going to augment where it's feasible and where it's needed. And that's why we're having the discussion on your department. And in my view, not just motors, but also the park safety specialist. By the way, park safety specialist is a working title? Is that why we use it?
Yeah, we use a working title inside the organization,
Okay.
but they are security rangers for the
So
city.
security
We
ranger is the
brought
class.
forward an item to change the title.
Yeah, that's what I
That
thought.
item was not adopted by the council,
Oh, we didn't adopt it?
but we would like to.
Okay. So in terms of the park safety specialists or security rangers, will you be, so the initial one going to 6, and then if there are 2 others going to 8, will you be reclassifying those positions into the security ranger classification if they're CSOs, or are you just going to reallocate the dollars and then?
That's part of the examination, to look at what we can do as we're doing the work.
Because the reclassification would include a council action if we or do we have the positions already, Steve?
The positions are in the budget.
They are, okay.
And if they're vacant, from time to time, we reclassify vacant positions.
Right.
The dollar amount is negligible.
So in this case, we would just qualify the individuals based on the testing and move them over. There's no reclassification that's needed. Well, the individuals, but that's administrative.
Yes, sir.
Okay, all right. So, so moving on, in terms of, so the number, Chief, that you use, 92, in assigned to patrol, that's going to include park safety specialists, Hope team officers, and any others, and motors? Or is that a
Wouldn't
separate?
include motors, it wouldn't include the security rangers, it would include our K-9 officers, our NAT team, and our Hope team, police officers.
Hope team, okay. And so when you back those out, then you're left with well, I'll call it pure patrol.
That's true.
And that's probably where our numbers differ.
Right, so it's 82 to 84 on those at FTE numbers, which is higher than we've had in the last few years. However, back to vacancies and injuries, that number, the operational
68, yeah.
number, it gets very complicated. There's been times when our operational numbers in patrol teams has been as low as 68, 64, because it really gets down low with injuries and such.
I'm told that's where the operational number is right now, so. Okay, so that explains the discrepancy between your 92 and my 68. When you back out Hope, when you back out some of the more specialized units.
Yes, sir.
And then you account for people who are out for whatever reason. You get to an operational number, and that number, I believe, is 68, but could be higher.
It is higher,
or-
it's
okay.
closer to 80 or just above it.
Okay. Now, in terms of your 2020 proposed budget, it does show an increase of 5 FTEs in administration. Can you just explain why we're adding 5 FTEs on the administration side and not the field side?
You mean removing 5 FTEs?
Oh, I thought we were adding.
No, in the police administration, the current budget is 59 FTEs, and for 2020 recommended, it's 62. So that is an increase of 3.
Yeah.
And I think one came from out of the Public Safety Augmentation Fund, but I'm not certain, so
Yeah,
Chief.
we are not adding any extra
No,
bodies.
but you reallocated 3 into administration. I think that's the question, so.
I thought it was, I have in my notes that it was 5, but.
No, page 11, 62.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So the 62, so let's go with we're increasing, at least on the budget, it appears we're increasing positions. So what's going on with that if we're not increasing the number of FTEs?
Well, again, it's a reallocation. The total number of FTEs in the department is static at 375 and a
No,
quarter.
I get that.
And so I'm asking the chief to explain the 3 that are moving into administration.
So we are not moving any new bodies on the books. It may have it that way because we've recounted our positions to account for where they're at today. And that's the actual deployment for that division, is what you see. So we're not adding, the budget has not increased with new personnel for administrative services. But we did add 2 years ago, I believe we added the body-worn camera personnel. There were 2 new ones that came in on the civilian side that helped us to manage that. That might be part of those positions that you're referring to.
So it sounds like it's not a reallocation, then. It sounds like we're now accounting for positions like we do in another part of the budget that maybe weren't accounted for but are approved.
No,
I'm having a hard
this is,
time
we will
understanding this.
we'll provide in our follow-up material a more definitive answer. This is based on the home labor distribution for every FTE in the department. And for the 2020 budget, 62 of those FTEs fall in to the unit, the organization, if you will, that's police administration. So we'll reconcile this.
All right, so, and I
I'm hearing the
think,
chief say he's not changing anything from a workflow, but certainly where people are budgeted, there's a change of 3 in administration.
and I'm looking at my notes because you're correct. It's 59 from 2019.
Correct.
But 2018, we were at 57.
Correct.
And that's where the 5, and so I'm guessing that we did account for some of the new ones, like the body worn camera person. I'd just like to understand where we
We'll
are.
reconcile those FTEs.
Okay, great, thank you. And workers' comp, again, now the workers' comp is going up by 1.3 million from 527 to 6.56. Are we actively pursuing the carve-out?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and as the chief indicated earlier, we've also done some things, for instance, to make it easier on our employees. We've brought a physical therapist into this building, so they don't need to travel and spend time. They can come and get some therapy here. We are making progress on the carve-out. When we review Human Resources Department, we'll be able to talk about that. What you see here in the workers' comp costs, we charge back to the departments based on a 3-year rolling average cost of claims. And just the cost of treatment continues to rise through normal inflationary pressure. And so we've actually done a very good job closing claims, but workers' comp is a terribly expensive proposition.
So just for people who may not be aware, the carve-out would be, state law allows us to carve our workers' comp program out of the state program and handle it more locally. And the hope is that employees and officers will be treated much more quickly and get back to work, and that we get the litigation out of it. I can tell you that the city of Los Angeles has recently created, first they had a pilot, and now they have a carve-out program that's gone global, if you will, within the city of Los Angeles. And at least first indications is that it's working, and it's saving the city quite a bit of money on workers' comp. So I would strongly suggest that we look at
We're moving forward on it.
that. But look at that model, because it's different than any other model that I've seen. And so look at the city of,
Their drop program.
and that's probably, it's not like the draw program. It's probably the first time I've said, look at the city of Los Angeles for a model. Usually I'm saying it the other way. But this is one that is different than what I've
Okay,
seen
I'll
elsewhere.
make sure the staff reviews that.
And I can get you names of people who
Okay,
were
thank you.
involved. And finally, a 1.2 million increase, Chief, to other contract services. And this is line item 811-400. You're proposing an increase of 1.2 million. And if you could just explain that.
Which fund is that, sir?
So on other contract services, line item is, in the budget is 811-400. It's about, it's page 2 of your proposed budget, and it's under services and supplies.
Page 1.
Oh, I'm sorry, page 1 of 2, thank you, yeah, page 1.
No, go back. Chief, you were on the right spot. Most of it, council member, is driven by Rose Bowl events.
I get that.
Rose Bowl events?
Additional sheriff resources necessary.
So we are talking about the New Year's Fund 106, correct? And the 1.275 is a cost for our Los Angeles Sheriff's Department, our CHP, and our Apex personnel, and that's the increase there.
Okay. And
Well, so there's a couple of things there. There's the New Year's Fund, which is the sheriff's contract for 1.1. But then in the projects fund, which is where we track expenditures for all non-New Year's events. So this would be this weekend's concerts or other events.
Okay.
We've needed to increase the sheriff's contract there Chief, please go back.
That's
And the highway patrol.
that's fine, but these are all pass-through costs, except for the
Correct.
tournament, which
Correct,
is
which is,
general.
and that's why we handle that in a different fund.
Okay, and so, but the other costs we recoup from
Yes, sir.
promoters, okay. There was one other thing. The internal services charges for field operations, that's a pretty big jump. In 2019, it was at 23,500, and now it's going to be 350,967. Does that just represent that we're catching up with some of the chargebacks, or what? That's a big.
I wouldn't say
discrepancy.
catching up. Our total internal service charges, I'll ask Mr. Hawksworth to perhaps mention what they've gone up as a total. They're allocated to all the departments, and then within the department, they tend to be broken down on a pro rata basis.
This line item's gone from 2018, 9,900.
I'm sorry,
to-
which line item?
This is internal services charges for field operations.
The number, Victor,
Is there a page number on the, we have
number of the account.
Chief, is this the MDCs that we added to the equipment
it was
replacement plan?
I want to say it's not just the additions, but the repairs to them as well, and
Right.
everything that we added with them.
Yeah, so I
That was a
believe this
one-year
is,
event, that wasn't a multiple-year event.
we don't have a breakdown by the division of the internal services charges.
I thought you did. Hold on a
We have the
second. Let me-
department as a whole.
No, it's for. Let me see if I can find it. I'm not seeing where I highlighted it. I'll
Well,
come
again,
back to
we'll follow up on
Yeah.
that. We'll get the number and we'll return
Okay.
with that information.
All right. Is that it, Victor?
Yes, that's it for the moment.
All right. Are there any more questions for the chief? We have, thank you, Chief. We have some comment cards.
Herman, followed by William